Captain Rith had a thing for black holes. Not in a romantic way, mind you. More like the way a moth feels about a flame. Curie probably used to be a satellite entertainment complex. An architectural marvel now reduced to a playground for cockroaches and scavengers. Not that she was surprised. Varenthia was always a dump, even before it got blown to hell. "Well, this is cozy," Calliope quipped, nudging a burnt-out holoscreen with the toe of her boot. It fizzled and died in a puff of smoke, clearly offended by her presence. "You call this cozy?" asked Grendel, her perpetually grumpy engineer who could make a sunny day seem like a funeral. He looked around with a sire expression that could curdle milk. "I call it a health hazard." "Oh, don't be such a pessimist," Calliope replied, her eyes scanning the debris with a kind of hopeful resignation. "At least we won't get lost. The smell alone is a great landmark." They were flanked by two more members of their merry little band. There was Jax, who swore he was a crack shot with a plasma rifle but mostly just cracked jokes. Then there was Ilara, not the overused name, mind you. Our Ilara was short for Ilarionia, a name her parents clearly regretted as much as she did. She was the brains of the outfit and the only one who still believed they could pull off this ridiculous plan. "We should keep moving," Ilarionia said, adjusting her glasses in a way that made her look like a disgruntled librarian, except she knew how to hack into high-security systems and had a penchant for explosions. Yeah, Jax chimed in, cradling his rifle as if it were a sleepy baby. "Let's find this artifact and get out before my boots melt into the pavement." Calliope smirked. "Afraid you'll have to walk barefoot, Jax." "Afraid I'd have to listen to your stories about it," Jax retorted, though a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. They moved through the rubble with a kind of practiced nonchalance, stepping over charred skeletons of long-abandoned hopes, arcades, cafes, and all the things people once wasted their lives on. All those dreams now ash under their boots, not that anyone missed them. The galaxy was a mess. Civil war was the new fashion trend, and everyone wanted a piece of the spotlight. Various factions, each more self-righteous than the last, were squabbling over control of the solar system like kids fighting over the last piece of candy. "You think that Codex is even real?" Grendel asked, breaking the silence with his usual skepticism. "It's as real as your social skills," Calliope shot back, earning a snort from Jax. "But seriously," Ilara intervened, her voice laced with a rare seriousness. "If the Harmonium Codex does what they say, it could change everything." "That's a big if," Grendel muttered. Calliope shrugged. "Big ifs are kind of our thing. Besides, what else are we going to do? Sit around and wait for the next faction to blow us to bits?" "I vote for not getting blown to bits," Jax said, raising his hand. "Just putting it out there." As they pressed on, the ruins seemed to shift around them, like a haunted carnival rearranging itself for the next unfortunate visitors. The air was filled with the distant whine of malfunctioning drones, little reminders that even in a wasteland, technology found a way to be annoying. "So, Calliope," Jax started, trying to lighten the mood. "What's the first thing you'll do if we find this magic book?" Calliope pretended to ponder for a moment. "Probably sell it to the highest bidder and retire to a nice, quiet asteroid somewhere." "Maybe take up knitting," Jax chuckled. "You'd die of boredom in a week." "True," she admitted. "But I'd die rich." They reached what had once been the central square of Varenthia, now a sprawling mass of rubble and twisted metal that resembled a giant's junkyard. In the center, half buried under debris, was a structure that might have been a library or a museum. Hard to tell with the roof caved in and the walls scorched black. "Looks promising," Ilarionia said, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the crumbling building. "Promising or deadly," Grendel muttered, but he followed them anyway. They picked their way through the wreckage, each step producing a chorus of crunches and creaks that would have sent more cautious explorers running. But caution wasn't their style. "So, how do we get in?" Jax asked, looking at the blocked entrances. "We knock," Calliope said, gesturing to Grendel. With a sigh, Grendel stepped forward, pulling out a device that looked suspiciously like a bomb and certainly behaved like one. He set it against the door and they all took a few steps back. "This is why we pay you the big bucks," Jax said, clapping Grendel on the back. "You don't pay me anything," Grendel replied deadpan. "Exactly," Jax grinned. "Big bucks." The explosion was mercifully brief and the door, or what was left of it, let out a groan like a dying beast as it collapsed inward. Smoke and dust filled the air, accompanied by the faint sound of Grendel coughing dramatically. "After you," Calliope said, waving a hand toward the newly formed entrance. Inside was a chaos of toppled shelves and scattered debris, but amidst the carnage there was something else, a faint glow emanating from the far side of the room. "You think that's it?" Ilarionia asked, her voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. "Only one way to find out," Calliope replied. They moved toward the glow, the air thick with anticipation and dust. As they approached, the source of the light became clearer, a pedestal, standing defiantly amid the ruins, upon which rested a crystalline object that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. "The Harmonium Codex," Jax breathed, staring at it like a kid on Christmas morning. "Looks fragile," Grendel said, ever the pessimist. "Probably shatters if you sneeze." "Don't sneeze then," Calliope shot back, her eyes never leaving the artifact. For a moment they all stood there, caught in the quiet awe of discovery. Then, as if the universe decided they were getting too comfortable, the ground beneath them began to rumble. "Oh, come on," Jax shouted over the noise. "Can't we catch a break for once?" The rumbling intensified, debris sliding and falling around them as the walls groaned ominously. It seemed even dead cities had a sense of humor. "Time to go," Calliope yelled, grabbing the codex and making a break for the exit. They sprinted through the collapsing building, each step echoing like a death knell. Behind them, the structure began to give way, as if the entire place decided it was done with their nonsense. "I swear," Grendel panted as they ran, "if we get out of this—" "I'm retiring to that asteroid," Calliope finished for him, her eyes wild with adrenaline. They burst out into the open air just as the building gave a final, resounding crash, burying the entrance under a ton of rubble. Panting and covered in dust, they stood in the eerie silence that followed, the codex clutched tightly in Calliope's hands. For a moment none of them spoke, each catching their breath and letting the reality of their find sink in. "So," Jax said, breaking the silence with a wry grin, "anyone else feel like we just stole the galaxy's most dangerous party favor?" Calliope chuckled, her eyes bright with the thrill of the adventure. "Nah, just the key to peace, maybe." "And now?" Ilarionia asked, her gaze steady on the artifact. "Now," Calliope said, a wicked smile on her lips, "we see who wants it the most." The galaxy might be on the brink of civil war, but in that moment, standing amidst the ruins with the Harmonium Codex in hand, Calliope knew one thing for certain: things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. And maybe, just maybe, they'd live long enough to enjoy it. The scent of singed metal and ozone clung to the air like an unwelcome guest that just wouldn't leave, as Calliope and her ragtag band stood, grinning like idiots, with the Harmonium Codex in hand. It seemed they'd won this round of Who Wants to Be a Galactic Target. Though if they were really lucky, maybe someone would just shoot them dead and be done with it. "All right, team," Calliope said, looking around at her crew. "We've got the codex. Now what? How about we don't hang around here waiting for the next planetary collapse?" Jax suggested, swinging his plasma rifle over his shoulder like it was a trusty old fishing rod. Not that he'd ever caught anything but trouble with it. "I say we head back to the ship," Ilarionia proposed, adjusting her glasses that were perpetually slipping down her nose. "Figure out our next move with a side of not being crushed to death." "A novel concept," Grendel grumbled, wiping dust off his jacket with an air of resigned disgust. "But my money's on this thing attracting more trouble than we want." Calliope was about to agree when a noise stopped her. The faint hiss of a plasma rifle charging. She exchanged a quick, knowing look with her team, a silent acknowledgement that their luck had, once again, run out. "Step away from the codex," came a voice slicker than oil on black ice, emanating from the shadows like bad news. Calliope squinted, trying to pick out the new players in this grim Game of Thrones. Out stepped Xyler, a creature of indeterminate species but definite ambition, all sleek lines and glinting eyes, flanked by a bunch of thugs who looked like they'd been recruited for their ability to sneer well. The latter had guns trained on Calliope's team, which was hardly a surprise. "Looks like we've got company," Jax quipped, his smile slipping into a grimace. "Should have brought the good china, or a better plan," Grendel muttered, his gaze shifting between the Codex and the intruders. Calliope raised an eyebrow. "Xyler, heard you were dead." "Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated," Xyler drawled, looking like someone who enjoyed a good rumor almost as much as a good conquest. "And here I was, thinking the universe had finally done something right," Calliope shot back, her grip on the Codex tightening. Xyler's smile was as sharp as a scalpel. "Hand over the Codex and maybe I'll consider letting you live. A generous offer, considering the alternatives." "You mean like getting shot or building a new career as a ghost?" Jax asked, dry as a desert. "Both sound like a vacation compared to dealing with you, Xyler," Calliope added, her eyes flicking over to Ilarionia, who was already calculating escape routes in her head. "Charming, as ever," Xyler said, his patience clearly wearing thinner than Calliope's last excuse at a family reunion. "But I'm not here for pleasantries. The Codex is a game changer, and I plan to be the one holding the cards." "Big talk for someone who's clearly compensating for something," Jax snorted, earning himself a withering glare from Ilarionia. "Jax, maybe cool it with the banter until we're not about to get vaporized," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's the fun in that?" he replied, though he did shut up if only for a moment. Calliope took a breath, the kind that made her wonder if this might just be her last. "Why the Codex, Xyler? What's in it for you?" "Power, my dear Calliope," Xyler said, his tone almost affectionate, like a cat playing with a particularly fascinating mouse. "The kind that tips the scales, ends wars, and puts me at the top." "Sounds exhausting," Calliope remarked. "We're more take a nap and see what happens kind of people. And yet," Xyler countered, "here you are, holding the very thing that could change everything." "Yeah, well, some of us were born with a knack for finding trouble," she quipped. "What's your excuse?" Before Xyler could reply, there was a tremor beneath their feet, a reminder that Varenthia wasn't done with them yet. Debris shifted ominously, and for a split second all eyes weren't on the Codex but on the shaking ground. Calliope seized the moment. "Ilarionia now." Without a word, Ilarionia moved, fingers flying over a device strapped to her wrist. There was a sharp beep, and suddenly a brilliant flash filled the air, blinding in its intensity. They dove for cover as the flashbang did its work, leaving Xyler's crew stumbling and shouting in confusion. In the chaos, Calliope clutched the Codex and sprinted toward the nearest cover, her team on her heels. "Nice trick," Jax yelled, half laughing, half panicking as they darted through the rubble. "Remind me to thank my mom for those magic lessons," Ilarionia replied, her eyes scanning for an escape route. They ducked and weaved through the debris, Xyler's voice barking orders behind them like a very angry but oddly polite drill sergeant. It was only a matter of time before the pursuit caught up. "Grendel, blow something up," Calliope shouted, glancing over her shoulder at their pursuers. Grumbling, Grendel fished another explosive from his pocket, muttering, "I'm gonna need a raise after this." "How about a survival bonus instead?" Calliope suggested as he tossed the explosive behind them. The resulting boom was music to their ears, if only because it meant one less obstacle between them and freedom. "That oughta slow them down," Grendel said, a rare note of satisfaction in his voice. "Buy us a few seconds," Jax corrected, still running like a man who just remembered his girlfriend's birthday. They burst out of the ruins, panting and wild-eyed, into what might generously be described as a clearing. More accurately, it was a place without immediate cover, which made them very obvious targets. There, Ilarionia pointed, her gaze landing on a dilapidated building that looked like it might once have been a warehouse. "We can lose them in there, or get boxed in," Grendel warned, though he didn't stop moving. "One problem at a time," Calliope said, already sprinting toward the derelict structure. They reached the warehouse just as Xyler's team spilled out of the ruins behind them, looking like a pack of rabid dogs on a very tight leash. It was, Calliope thought, the best-worst scenario, plenty of chaos, but at least they were the ones causing it. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and decaying crates, the kind of place that screamed trap, but also offered just enough cover to play hide and seek with death. "Split up," Calliope ordered, gesturing for Jax and Grendel to head one way while she and Ilarionia took another. "Keep them chasing shadows. And if we run into Xyler," Jax asked, his usual humor dimmed by the urgency of their situation. "Run faster," Calliope replied, a grin tugging at her lips despite everything. They scattered, the sound of Xyler's men echoing through the cavernous space, more a chorus of curses and threats than anything resembling military precision. Calliope ducked behind a stack of crates, motioning for Ilarionia to follow. "We've got to get back to the ship," Ilarionia whispered, her mind clearly already several steps ahead. "Use the codex to reach out to someone who can help us." "Who'd that be?" Calliope asked, peering through a gap in the crates. "Last I checked, our list of friends was shorter than Xyler's patience." "Then we make new ones," Ilarionia said, the spark of an idea lighting up her eyes. "The codex, if it's a story, we sell it as one. A story everyone wants to be part of." "Everyone loves a good story," Calliope mused, considering the possibilities. "And we're the ones holding the pen. But first we need to get out of here alive," Ilarionia reminded her, the weight of their reality crashing back like a tidal wave. "Right," Calliope agreed, glancing once more at the codex before tucking it securely under her arm. "Let's give them a tale worth telling." Their whispered planning was cut short by the sound of footsteps, too close for comfort. Calliope motioned for silence, pressing herself against the crate as they waited, breaths shallow and hearts pounding. Come out, wherever you are," a voice called, laced with mockery. It was one of Xyler's thugs swaggering through the shadows like he owned the place. "Can't hide forever." Calliope exchanged a look with Ilarionia, the unspoken question hanging between them: fight or flee? The decision was made for them when Grendel's voice crackled over their earpieces, practically vibrating with tension. "We've got a problem, more company coming." "Define more," Calliope hissed, already knowing she wouldn't like the answer. "Enough to make this interesting," Jax chimed in, his voice tinged with that manic edge he always got in a firefight. "And not in a fun way." "Time to improvise," Calliope whispered to Ilarionia, who nodded, her fingers already flying over her device in preparation for whatever madness they were about to dive into. And so, the story continued, filled with more twists and turns than a snake on a caffeine high. They'd come looking for a lost piece of history, a relic that promised power and change. What they'd found was a new tale to tell, one where survival was the prize and cunning the currency. As the footsteps grew closer, Calliope knew one thing for sure: if they made it out of this mess, they'd have a story worth telling. One that might just change the galaxy, if they survived long enough to tell it. Calliope crouched low behind the rusted machinery of the warehouse, feeling the weight of the Harmonium Codex tucked under her arm like a ticking time bomb. It was a hell of a thing they'd stumbled onto, an ancient relic of humanity's past, promising secrets and power, or maybe just a fancy paperweight if they couldn't crack it open. She glanced at Ilarionia, who was fiddling with her wrist device like she was trying to disarm said bomb, which wasn't far from the truth. "Don't you wish we had a manual for this thing?" Calliope muttered, trying to ignore the increasing volume of boots echoing through the warehouse. "I'm beginning to think our ancestors had a sick sense of humor," Ilarionia replied, squinting at her screen. "Or maybe they just loved puzzles more than surviving," Calliope snorted. We come from a long line of folks who thought running headfirst into trouble was a good idea. Clearly, we inherited the family brain cell. As Ilarionia worked, Calliope's mind wandered. Back to the ship, the one place they might be able to catch a break if they could just get there in one piece. Problem was, Xyler and his band of merry psychopaths were as persistent as a toothache. Think the Codex has any tips on how to make friends and influence psychopaths? Calliope asked. Ilarionia gave a small, tight smile. If it does, I haven't found them yet. But we might get lucky and find instructions on how to make a nice cup of tea. Great. A warm beverage to calm us while we're getting shot at. Suddenly, their earpieces crackled to life. Grendel again, sounding like he'd just run a marathon while debating the merits of living. Calliope, we've got incoming. Xyler's brought reinforcements, and I'm not talking about the kind you'd want at a family BBQ unless you like your ribs medium rare with a side of terror. Fantastic. Any suggestions on how to not die horribly in the next 5 minutes? Calliope replied, trying to sound more optimistic than she felt. Working on it, Grendel shot back, which wasn't exactly reassuring. Jax, how's your side looking? Calliope asked, hoping for better news. Well, let's see, Jax mused, his voice crackling with static and sarcasm. I'm pinned behind what used to be a wall, but now it's more of a decorative feature. Could use a hand if you're not too busy. Calliope glanced at Ilarionia, who was tapping furiously at her device. We'll swing by and pick you up. In the meantime, maybe see if you can trade them your charming personality for safe passage. I tried. Apparently, it's not as valuable as I was led to believe, Jax said dryly. Meanwhile, Ilarionia let out a small, triumphant noise. I think I've got something. The Codex. It's a series of stories, Calliope. Old Earth tales about resilience, unity, the kind of stuff that gets us through the end of the world. Or just another Tuesday afternoon on Varenthia, Calliope quipped. What's the angle? If we can decode more of it, we might find a way to leverage these stories. Rally some allies, maybe even turn Xyler's crew against him if they've got a shred of conscience left. Calliope raised an eyebrow. You're banking on conscience. No, I'm banking on their greed and self-preservation instincts, Ilarionia corrected. But hey, worth a shot. The footsteps were getting too close for comfort, a reminder that while they played codebreakers, the galaxy wasn't hitting pause on their problems. Calliope grabbed Ilarionia's arm. Time to play Dodge the Death Squad. Let's go. They darted through the maze of the warehouse, each step echoing like a gunshot in the brittle silence. Calliope's heart pounded in her ears, a rhythm that screamed urgency even as her mind raced with possibilities. If the Codex was a weapon, it was one made of words and stories, a weapon that could turn the tide if wielded correctly. Behind them, the familiar crack of a plasma rifle punctuated the air, followed by a string of curses that could only mean Jax was doing his best to be a one-man army. They rounded a corner, and there he was, plastered against what little cover the crumbling wall offered, grinning like a man who'd just found a winning lottery ticket and a swarm of angry bees at the same time. Good to see you too, Jax said, pushing off from his makeshift shield. Got anything to even the odds? Hope and sarcasm, Calliope replied, handing him a spare power cell. Think you can make that work? I've made do with less, Jax said, slapping the cell into place with a satisfying click. Let's give them something to remember us by. The trio moved in sync, a well-oiled machine fueled by desperation and shared madness. They zigzagged through the warehouse, past the rusted hulks of forgotten machinery and stacks of crates that probably hadn't held anything useful for centuries. Grendel, we're heading your way. Got a plan? Calliope asked, breathless but determined. Funny you should ask, Grendel replied, his voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. I found a nice little explosive surprise in the corner here. Just waiting for the right moment to introduce Xyler's goons to their new best friend. Sounds like a party, Jax said, glancing back to check their six. Let's make it one to remember. They reunited with Grendel in a section of the warehouse that somehow managed to look even more dilapidated than the rest. He was crouched behind a panel, eyes glinting with mischief as he set the final touches on his makeshift bomb. "Think they'll appreciate the fireworks?" Calliope asked, crouching beside him. "Not if they are on the receiving end," Grendel replied, a rare smile crossing his face. "But it might just buy us the time we need." As if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Xyler's men closing in like wolves scenting blood. Calliope's heart skipped a beat. They were running out of runway, and soon it would be do or die. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. A series of nods answered her, each one tinged with the reckless courage that had somehow kept them alive this long. Grendel hit the detonator, and the world exploded into a cacophony of sound and light. The blast wave rolled through the warehouse like an angry god, shaking the walls and sending debris flying in every direction. Calliope and her team ducked, shielding their faces as the shockwave passed over them, leaving behind a haze of smoke and confusion. "Move!" Calliope shouted, dragging her team to their feet as they stumbled through the chaos. The explosion had done its job, and Xyler's men were in disarray, coughing and shouting as they tried to regroup. They made a break for it, sprinting through the wreckage toward the exit, each step a gamble against fate and fury. In the distance, the faint outline of their ship loomed, a beacon of hope, or more likely, just another trap waiting to spring. "Ilarionia, tell me you've got something that'll get us out of here," Calliope called over her shoulder, adrenaline propelling her forward. "Working on it," Ilarionia replied, her fingers a blur over her device. "If we can get to the ship, I can use the codex to scramble their signals. Might buy us enough time to take off." "Might is a word I don't like," Jax remarked, glancing back at the chaos they'd left behind. "Then you're really gonna hate probably not," Ilarionia shot back, though her grin was as infectious as ever. They burst from the warehouse, lungs burning and hearts racing, into the unforgiving embrace of Varenthia's wasteland, a landscape of twisted metal and shattered dreams. The ship was tantalizingly close, yet each step felt like a marathon, the weight of the codex heavy in Calliope's arms. Behind them, Xyler's men weren't far behind, regrouping faster than any reasonable person should be able to after an explosion. Calliope could hear Xyler's voice, barking orders with a venom that suggested he wasn't taking this setback well. "Grendel, I could really use some good news right about now," Calliope said, her tone only half joking. "I'll tell you all about it over a drink, assuming we don't get vaporized first," Grendel replied, adjusting the strap of his bag as they ran. "We better have a bar left to drink in," Jax added, his plasma rifle still at the ready. They reached the ship, hearts pounding and lungs screaming for relief. Calliope slapped the access panel, willing it to recognize her and open up. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, and they piled inside, sealing it behind them as they leaned against the bulkhead, panting like they'd run a marathon on fast forward. "Now would be a great time to get us in the air," Jack suggested, not bothering to hide the urgency in his voice. "No pressure or anything," Ilarionia said, sliding into the pilot's seat and bringing the systems online. The engines whined, a sound that should have been reassuring but instead felt like the universe taunting them with the possibility of failure. Come on," Calliope muttered, watching the holoscreen flicker to life, its outdated interface more a hindrance than a help. A series of warning lights blinked at them, a Christmas tree of potential disaster. Ilarionia's fingers flew over the controls, her brow furrowed in concentration. "We've got company. Xyler's men are setting up for a blockade. Great. Just once I'd like to encounter a problem that doesn't involve us getting shot at," Grendel said, sliding into the co-pilot's seat. "And miss all this excitement," Jax quipped, though his grin was noticeably less confident. "Brace yourselves," Ilarionia warned, punching the thrusters with more hope than certainty. The ship lurched, the ground falling away as they lifted off, the thrusters roaring to life like a beast unleashed. The ship bucked and weaved, Ilarionia wrestling with the controls as if taming a wild beast. Behind them, the landscape of Varenthia shrank, though Calliope couldn't shake the feeling that their problems were growing exponentially. "Are we in the clear?" she asked, glancing back at the holoscreen. "Define clear," Ilarionia replied, tweaking the controls to avoid a spray of laser fire that lit up the space around them like a deadly fireworks display. "Working on getting us out of their targeting range." The ship shuddered, alarms blaring as they took a hit. Calliope grimaced, the cockpit a symphony of stress and survival. "Can we outrun them?" "Not unless we want to leave half the ship behind," Grendel answered, his fingers flying across the console. "Then we fight," Calliope said, setting her jaw. "Ilarionia, get us some distance." "Jax, Grendel, let's see if we can discourage our friends from following." The ship surged forward, Ilarionia coaxing every last ounce of speed from the thrusters as Jax and Grendel manned the turrets, their focus sharp and deadly. The air around them crackled with energy, the ship's defensive systems straining against the onslaught. Calliope clutched the codex, the weight of it a reminder that even in the darkest corners of space, stories had the power to change everything. If they could just survive long enough to tell theirs. "Jax, Grendel, status," she called, peering out the viewport as stars streaked past. "Keeping them busy," Jax replied, his voice edged with the thrill of the fight. "But they are persistent, I'll give them that." "Could use a bit less persistence on their part," Grendel muttered, his expression grim but focused. As they fought, Calliope's mind raced, juggling the immediate threat with the larger picture. The Codex was more than just a relic. It was a testament to humanity's ability to endure, to adapt, to find a way even when the deck was stacked against them. "Ilarionia, any brilliant ideas?" Calliope asked, scanning the flashing readouts. "Just one," Ilarionia replied, her eyes alight with that reckless spark. "If we can hit their lead ship, we might scatter the rest." "Give us a chance to." The ship rattled and wheezed like a smoker hacking up a lung, but it was still flying, more or less. Ilarionia clenched the controls with the determination of someone who still believed in miracles, or at least seemed willing to fake it. "If this heap holds together, I'll name my first child after it," Calliope muttered, peering over Ilarionia's shoulder at the flickering holoscreen. "Which part of the ship?" Jax quipped from his seat, where he was busy trying to ensure their enemies had a few less limbs than they started with. "The ramshackle hull or the engines that sound like a goddamned funeral dirge?" "Maybe both," Calliope said, her tone as dry as Varenthia's wasteland. Grendel tapped away at his console, trying to keep the shields intact. "I dunno, I kinda like funeral dirge as a name. Has a ring to it, don't you think?" "Focus, guys," Ilarionia cut in, though her lips tugged upward. "Unless you want Xyler's crew boarding us for an autograph session." Calliope shook her head. "I'm not in the mood for groupies today." The ship shuddered under another barrage, and their collective sense of humor felt thinner than a politician's promises. They had to do something, and fast. Calliope's eyes fell on the Harmonium Codex, resting heavy and mysterious in her arms. An idea, half-baked and reckless, formed in her mind, a desperation play. But then, what's life without a little reckless stupidity? "All right, listen up," she said, drawing the attention of her ragtag team. "We need to buy ourselves some breathing room, and the Codex might be our ticket." Grendel raised an eyebrow. "You're going to start reading bedtime stories to Xyler's men." "Not exactly," Calliope replied, a grin spreading across her face. "But if Ilarionia can tap into the right frequencies, we can broadcast something from this thing that'll make the whole damn solar system sit up and listen. Because everyone loves surprise broadcasts," Jax remarked, sarcasm as sharp as his aim. Ilarionia nodded slowly, eyes alight with intrigue. "If I can sync the Codex with my device, we might just pull it off. But it's gonna be one hell of a ride. Never like things easy," Calliope quipped, heart pounding with the thrill of the plan or the fear of dying horribly. "Hard to tell, really." "All right," Grendel said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's make the universe listen to something other than their own screaming for a change." As Ilarionia worked her magic, the ship hit a patch of calm in the storm, a breather before the next wave. And like that calm, Calliope's mind raced through the possibilities. If the Codex truly held the stories of ancient power, then maybe, just maybe, it could become the rallying cry they needed. "Yo," Captain Jax called, snapping her from her thoughts. "What kind of bedtime story are we telling them? The kind that shakes things up," Calliope replied. "The kind that makes other factions reconsider who they're gunning for." Factions. More like fashion statements with guns, Grendel snorted. "Exactly," she agreed, adrenaline making her voice hard-edged. "The right story can change everything. But first, we have to survive long enough to tell it." Ilarionia's fingers danced over her device, sweat beading on her forehead. "Got it. Frequencies locked in." "Ready when you are." Calliope took a deep breath, the weight of what she was about to do settling over her like a shroud. "Let's give them a story they won't forget." The Codex hummed to life, energy crackling through the air as Ilarionia synced it with the ship systems. Calliope felt a tingle run up her spine, a sensation that was either profound insight or the prelude to electrocution. Hard to tell these days. As the broadcast went live, the Codex's symbols flared, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. The ship, against all odds, held steady, and Calliope could almost hear the collective gasp of the factions as their message spread across the solar system. "Here's hoping Xyler's got a poor attention span," Jax muttered, fingers twitching on his plasma rifle. "Or a sudden urge to take up knitting," Grendel added. "Anything to keep him off our asses." The message rippled outward, a wave of uncertainty and chaos. Factions across the system had to be re-evaluating their strategies, wondering whether siding with Xyler was the savvy move or if the Codex's secrets were worth a gamble. "Look," Ilarionia said quietly, pointing at the holoscreen. "Already getting some bites." Blips appeared on the radar, unexpected allies answering their call. Ships rolled over to their side like turncoats at a masquerade, swayed by the allure of whatever story they'd imagined from the transmission. "Seems like some folks actually hate Xyler more than us," Jax said, a grin threatening to break free. "Who knew not that it's a high bar," Calliope commented, watching the tactical map shift in their favor. "But I'll take what I can get." Grendel tapped at his console, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Let's just hope they're as good at fighting as they are at bandwagoning." The mood in the cockpit lifted slightly, though the shadow of Xyler's retaliation loomed large. The man was nothing if not relentless, and Calliope knew they hadn't heard the last of him. "You're thinking too loud," Ilarionia said, noticing Calliope's expression. "What's bugging you?" "Xyler won't take this lying down," Calliope replied, her voice carrying the weight of grim certainty. "He'll come at us harder, and when he does, it's gonna be messy." "Messy's my middle name," Jax said with a grin that did nothing to hide the tension in his eyes. "Your parents must have hated you," Grendel shot back, earning a chuckle from the rest of them. "All right," Calliope said, rolling her shoulders and trying to ease the knot of anxiety. "Let's keep moving. We've got allies, but we're gonna need every last one of them when Xyler shows up with his next trick." As if summoned by her words, the ship's alarms blared with a new urgency. Xyler's forces, those who hadn't defected, were regrouping, their ships forming a blockade that promised more trouble than a herd of drunk space cows. "Speak of the devil," Ilarionia muttered, snapping the controls to evade another volley of fire. "Time to put those allies to the test," Calliope said, eyes narrowing at the screen. "And remind Xyler why it's a bad idea to piss us off." They dove into the fray, an exhilarating and terrifying dance between life and death. Their allies moved in to support, the ships weaving through the battlefield with a coordination that was impressive for something thrown together at the last minute. Jax and Grendel took turns at the turrets, their shots precise and deadly. Ilarionia pushed the ship to its limits, every maneuver a gamble, every decision a potential disaster. "Hey, Calliope," Grendel called, his voice strained but confident. "Think we can take out their lead ship? Might make him think twice." "Worth a shot," she replied, focusing on the tactical screen. "Jax, you up for some fireworks always," Jax said, his grin now full of the reckless enthusiasm that had kept them alive this long. Together, they targeted Xyler's lead ship, their attacks relentless and focused. The Codex's broadcast had sown discord, and now it was time to capitalize on the chaos. "Keep them off balance," Calliope ordered, watching as their allies moved in to support the assault. "We need to take them down hard." The battle raged, space alive with the clash of ambition and desperation. Calliope felt the ship shudder under the strain, but she refused to back down, refused to let Xyler's ambition crush everything she'd worked for. Almost there, Ilarionia shouted, sweat dripping down her temples. Just a little longer, Jax and Grendel fired in tandem, their shots finding their mark with ruthless efficiency. The lead ship wavered, sparks flying as its systems buckled under the assault. "Now or never," Calliope murmured, her heart racing as they pushed for the final blow. The ship exploded in a brilliant flare of light, signaling a turning point in the battle. Cheers erupted from their allies, a collective roar of victory that echoed through the comms. "Nice shot," Ilarionia said, a hint of awe in her voice as she glanced at Jax and Grendel. "Told you I was good," Jax replied, though there was a touch of relief mixed in with his usual bravado. "Let's not get cocky," Calliope said, though she couldn't suppress her own grin. "This fight ain't over yet." As the remaining enemy ships reeled from the loss, their allies pressed the advantage, forcing Xyler's forces into a retreat. Calliope watched the tactical map shift in their favor, each victory a small step toward survival. But she knew better than to count on luck. Fortune was a fickle mistress, and Xyler wouldn't stay down for long. "Let's regroup," Calliope ordered, determination settling over her like a well-worn cloak. "We've got work to do and not much time to do it." As the ship's alarms quieted and the immediate threat faded, Calliope allowed herself a moment to breathe, the codex still thrumming with untapped potential in her grasp. "Nice work, team," she said, her voice carrying the weight of gratitude and exhaustion. "We're not dead yet," high praise, Grendel remarked, though his smile was genuine. "Here's hoping our new allies don't have buyer's remorse," Jax added, wiping sweat from his brow. Ilarionia leaned back in her seat, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "We'll see," she said, her gaze turning thoughtful. "The Codex has stirred up more than we bargained for." Calliope nodded, the weight of their victory tempered by the knowledge of the battles still to come. As they set course for safer territory, the stakes had never been higher, and the fight was far from over. But for now, they'd earned a moment of respite, a brief lull in the chaos that might just be the calm before the storm. And in the quiet, Calliope allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They'd told their story, and for now, at least, they were still the authors of their own fate. Calliope surveyed the wasteland that had once been Varenthia, now little more than a smoldering reminder of the universe's lack of sentimentality. She and Ilarionia crouched behind rusted machinery in a decrepit warehouse, a rickety shelter from the chaos outside. Varenthia had been a dump even before Xyler decided to redecorate with plasma bombs. Now, it was a dump with flair. "Great location choice," Ilarionia muttered, peering through a crack in the wall at the devastation outside. "Scenic." "Charming, yeah. A real up-and-coming neighborhood," Calliope replied, voice as dry as Varenthia's dust. "Nothing says prime real estate like being in the crosshairs of a maniac." Xyler had launched a full-scale attack, and they'd been caught with their space pants down. Morale among the crew was lower than a snake's belly in a trench. "Anyone else feel like we're the punchline in some cosmic joke?" Jax's voice crackled over the comm. He was stationed with Grendel a block away, keeping an eye on their dwindling ammunition. More like the entire stand-up routine, Grendel chimed in, his usual bravado tempered by a rare note of frustration. Calliope sighed, casting a glance at the flickering holoscreen displaying their bleak tactical situation. "We're not dead yet," she said, trying to muster some semblance of leadership. Not for lack of trying, Ilarionia shot back, fiddling with her wrist device to sync with the harmonium codex. This thing better have more than just bedtime stories. The codex was their only potential savior, a relic of ancient power wrapped in mystery and probably quite a bit of dust. Calliope wasn't placing bets, but if she had to gamble, she'd rather do it here than at the galactic poker table against Xylar. "What's the plan, boss?" Jax asked. "Please tell me it involves a beach and a cocktail. More like not dying in the next 5 minutes," Calliope answered. "But let's keep dreaming." Ilarionia's fingers paused over the codex as it hummed softly. "I think I've found something," she said, her voice laced with cautious optimism. "A story about a weapon. Could be our ace, or just another bedtime story to distract us while the ship goes down in flames," Grendel pointed out, ever the realist. "But what a distraction," Calliope replied. "If we can use it, we might just turn this mess around." The warehouse's corrugated roof rattled ominously, a reminder of the battle continuing above. Calliope knew they were on borrowed time. Xylar's forces were regrouping and hope was wearing thin. The codex was their last card and she needed it to be a trump. Ilarionia frowned at the codex, tapping her wrist device. "There's a passage here, something about harnessing energy from thought. Sounds like nonsense, but what do we have to lose other than our sanity?" Jax quipped. "That ship sailed long ago," Calliope replied, taking a breath. "Let's roll the dice." As they synced the codex with the ship systems, a new energy rippled through the air, a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. The codex's symbols glowed, casting eerie shadows that flickered like specters across the walls. "Anything happening?" Grendel asked, sounding hopeful for once. "Not unless you count the threat of spontaneous combustion," Ilarionia said, her sarcasm a thin veil over her anxiety. Calliope focused on the codex, willing it to reveal its secrets. The air felt charged, as if the universe was holding its breath, waiting for their next move. Outside, Xylar's forces were closing in. The warehouse shook as explosions sounded nearby, each one a reminder that their time was almost up. "Think we can bluff our way out of this one?" Jax asked. "Only if Xylar suddenly develops a conscience," Grendel replied. "Or a sense of humor," Calliope said, her gaze fixed on the codex as it hummed with potential. "But somehow I doubt it." Ilarionia's eyes widened, a flicker of hope crossing her face. "I think it's responding to us. Maybe if we focus we can channel it." "Channel what, our fear?" Jax asked. "I'm practically swimming in it, more like our determination," Calliope said, her voice steady even as her heart raced. "Think of what we're fighting for, revenge mostly." Grendel's deadpan delivery elicited a grin from Jax, a rare moment of levity amid the chaos. "Exactly," Calliope replied. "Let's give Xylar a reason to regret underestimating us." They concentrated on the codex, a collective will driving their thoughts. The energy in the room shifted, like a tide turning, uncertain but promising. "Please tell me this isn't just psychosomatic," Jax murmured, fingers crossed. "Feels real enough to me," Ilarionia said, her voice tinged with awe as the codex pulsed, stronger now, syncing with their minds. The holoscreen flashed, displaying data that hadn't been there moments before. A tactical map lit up, revealing weaknesses in Xylar's forces, vulnerabilities they hadn't suspected. "Looks like the codex is full of surprises," Calliope said, a determined smile forming. "Let's hit them where it hurts." With renewed resolve, they formulated a plan. The codex had given them a glimmer of hope, a chance to turn the tide. Now all they had to do was survive long enough to act on it. "Ready to dance?" Calliope asked, looking at Ilarionia. "Ready to lead," the pilot replied, determination etched on her face. They transmitted their newfound intel to the Allies who'd answered their call, forming a unified front against Xylar's assault. The odds were still against them, but they'd been in worse positions. Maybe. Probably. As they prepared to rejoin the fray, Calliope felt a surge of adrenaline. The universe might be a cruel, indifferent place, but for now they had a fighting chance, and sometimes that was all you needed. Let's remind Xyler why it's bad form to crash a party without an invitation, Jax said, his grin back in full force. Especially when the hosts are armed and slightly unhinged, Grendel added, his fingers dancing over the weapons console. Together, they launched their counterattack, a chaotic ballet of defiance and desperation. The Codex had given them a story, and damn if they weren't going to make it a bestseller. Explosions lit up the sky as they joined the battle, their allies rallying around them. Xyler's forces faltered under the unexpected assault, their cohesion unraveling like a cheap sweater with a pulled thread. "Keep pushing," Calliope ordered, her voice firm and unyielding. "We've got them on the ropes." The battle raged, a cacophony of destruction and resolve. Calliope felt the ship shudder beneath them, but they pressed on, driven by the Codex's revelations and their own stubborn will. As the tide began to turn, she caught a glimpse of Xyler's flagship, the symbol of his arrogance and ambition. It loomed on the horizon, a dark shadow against the chaos. "There's our target," she said, pointing. "Let's make sure he remembers this day. Think he'll send us a thank you card?" Jax asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Only if it's stuffed with explosives," Ilarionia replied, steering them toward the flagship. As they bore down on Xyler's ship, Calliope felt a fierce satisfaction. The Codex had given them a chance, but it was their grit and determination that would see them through. "Fire at will," she commanded, her gaze locked on the enemy vessel. Weapons blazed, a symphony of destruction and defiance. The flagship shuddered, its defenses buckling under the relentless assault. It was a risk, a gamble, but they had nothing left to lose. The battle reached fever pitch, chaos and fury swirling around them. The Codex pulsed with energy, a silent witness to their defiance, a reminder of the power of a well-told story. "Here's to us," Grendel said, his voice a quiet thread of hope amid the noise. "To surviving another day," Ilarionia added. "And to making Xyler regret ever picking a fight with us," Jax finished, his grin fierce and unyielding. As the flagship began to break apart, Calliope allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide, proving that even in the darkest of hours there was always a sliver of hope, a chance to fight on. The battle wasn't over, but they'd given Xyler something to think about. And for now, that was enough. They'd live to fight another day, and maybe, just maybe, they'd get to write the ending to this story on their own terms. Calliope rubbed the bridge of her nose, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on her skull like a hangover from the pits of hell. Around her, the warehouse buzzed with the frenetic energy of people who knew they were living on borrowed time and caffeine. The Codex had given them a lifeline, but now they needed to reel in the galaxy. "All right, folks, let's put on a show," she said, glancing at the tired but resolute faces around her. "Any ideas on how we can make a live broadcast from the arse end of nowhere?" Ilarionia smirked, her fingers already dancing over the wrist device. "Well, if we're going to be famous, we might as well go big. I've rigged the Codex to interface with the ship's comms. We can beam our little bedtime story to every corner of the galaxy. Just what I always wanted, to become space famous while dodging plasma bombs," Grendel muttered, checking the charge on his rifle. Jax, ever the optimist, grinned wide enough to show teeth. "Hey, maybe we'll go viral." Resistance Fighter's Last Stand sounds like a hit, right? Sure. Right after How Not to Die in a Wasteland becomes a bestseller, Calliope replied dryly. "But if we're going out, let's do it with style." Ilarionia's eyes flickered with a mix of excitement and dread. The Codex's story is powerful. It talks about unity and hope and all that jazz. Maybe it's exactly what people need to hear, assuming they're not too busy watching reality shows, Grendel added, rolling his eyes. "Well, our reality's about to get a whole lot more interesting," Jax said, nodding to the holoscreen as the tactical map updated. "Xyler's not going to sit around while we air our dirty laundry. Time to steal the show then," Calliope said, determination hardening her voice. "We need to buy enough time to get our message out." Ilarionia started tapping commands into her device, sinking the codex with their ancient, wheezing ship. The hum of its engines picked up, echoing like a dying whale trying to sing one last song. Broadcast is live in 3, 2, 1. Ilarionia's voice was steady, though the tension was palpable. And we're on. Calliope stepped in front of the camera, giving it her best I'm not dead yet smile. People of the galaxy, we're coming to you live from Varenthia, once a dump, now just a bigger dump with a higher body count. I'm Calliope, and I've got a story to tell you. The codex hummed in the background, its symbols flickering with an eerie light that seemed to dance across the walls like mischievous ghosts. Today we stand at the edge of oblivion, she continued, her voice gaining strength. But we've found something, an ancient relic with a story of hope, of unity, of a power greater than Xyler's plasma bombs. Jax gave a thumbs up from behind the camera. Nice intro. Real tear-jerker. Shut up, Jax, Calliope muttered, struggling to keep a straight face. We're fighting not just for ourselves, but for everyone who's been crushed under the heel of tyrants like Xyler. And we're asking you to stand with us, or at least send pizza, Grendel quipped, earning a snort from Ilarionia. The holoscreen showed the transmission indicators. People were watching. Maybe not enough to topple a regime, but enough to make waves. In the far reaches of known space, calls were being made, allies stirring, the beginnings of a rebellion taking root. Think they're buying it? Grendel asked, his voice a mix of hope and skepticism. Hope springs eternal or some crap like that, Calliope replied, her heart pounding like a war drum. Cutting through the noise now, Ilarionia said, eyes focused on the scrolling data. We're being picked up by independent channels. People are listening. Jax leaned closer, his breath a mix of stale coffee and desperation. Xyler's bound to notice. He'll come down on us like a ton of bricks. That's the idea, Calliope replied, her smile grim. We need him to overextend, to see us as a threat. Grendel snorted. You mean besides the ragtag group of misfits with a death wish? Hey, misfit pride, Jax said, bumping fists with him. Ilarionia's fingers flew over her device, managing the comms with the finesse of a concert pianist playing a rigged keyboard. We've got about 10 minutes before Xyler's forces reach us. Enough time to make our point. Calliope nodded, leaning into the camera one last time. To everyone listening, to those who've lost hope, we're not done fighting, and neither should you be. Let's give Xyler something to remember us by. The broadcast cut, the moment hanging heavy in the air like the aftermath of a bad joke. They'd set the stage. Now it was time to see if anyone was willing to join the act. Their ship rattled as another explosion rocked Varenthia, the noise echoing through the decrepit warehouse like a cosmic laugh track. Calliope looked around at her crew, feeling a strange mix of pride and impending doom. Everyone ready? She asked, her voice steady despite the chaos. Born ready, Grendel replied, cradling his rifle like a favorite toy. Jax flashed a grin. Let's give Xyler the middle finger he deserves. Ilarionia adjusted her wrist device, her expression a mix of determination and resignation. Time to see if the codex can really back up its bedtime stories. The ship's engines roared to life, a sound like 1,000 angry bees gearing up for a final sting. Their ragtag band of rebels, the last line of defense against tyranny, was as ready as they'd ever be. They launched into the fray, the codex's energy weaving through their systems like a mischievous sprite. Xyler's forces loomed on the horizon, a dark cloud of inevitability ready to snuff out their tiny spark of defiance. Think we'll get fan mail? Jax asked, his fingers dancing over the weapon's console. Only if we survive, Calliope said, her gaze fixed on the enemy ahead. Let's remind Xyler why we're more than just a nuisance. As they dove into the chaos, plasma bolts lighting up the sky like a fireworks display gone wrong, Calliope's heart raced with adrenaline. They might not win, but they damn well give Xyler something to remember. The battle raged, a cacophony of destruction and defiance echoing through the void. Their allies, spurred by the broadcast, joined the fray, a ragged patchwork of resistance fighters banding together against a common foe. Keep pushing forward, Calliope ordered, her voice cutting through the noise like a whip. Easier said than done, Grendel grumbled, squeezing off shots with practiced precision. The codex pulsed, its energy a tangible force guiding their movements, filling them with a sense of reckless courage born from desperation. "Looks like the store is working," Ilarionia said, her voice tinged with awe. "People are rallying. Just hope it's enough," Calliope said, her gaze flicking to the tactical map. "We need to find a way to cripple Xyler's command structure. Think he'll take a lunch break," Jax quipped, firing the ship's cannons with gleeful abandon. "Only if it's his last supper," Grendel replied, a grim smile on his face. As they pressed the attack, Calliope spotted an opening, a chink in the armor of Xyler's forces. It wasn't much, but it was something. "There," she said, pointing, "a weak spot in their formation. If we hit it hard enough, we might just break through." "Let's do it," Ilarionia said, her voice a fierce whisper of determination. They charged forward, a ragtag band of rebels fueled by hope and raw nerve. The Codex's energy surged, guiding their movements, lending them a strength they hadn't known they possessed. As they closed in on their target, Calliope felt a flicker of something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was burning bright and unyielding. "Let's give him hell," Jax said, his grin wide enough to split his face. "Hell's got nothing on us," Calliope replied, her voice fierce and unyielding. The battle raged on, their small ship weaving through the chaos like a dancer in the storm. Xyler's forces pressed down, relentless and unyielding, but the Codex's story had sparked something in the galaxy, a flicker of resistance, a whisper of change. As they neared the weak point, Calliope felt the ship shudder, the strain of the battle bearing down on them like a cosmic weight. But they pressed on, driven by the Codex's revelations and their own stubborn will. "Here we go," Grendel said, his voice a quiet thread of hope. They hit the weak spot with everything they had, the ship's weapons blazing a trail of destruction through the enemy ranks. The formation buckled, a ripple of chaos spreading through Xyler's forces. "We're breaking through," Ilarionia said, her voice a mix of disbelief and elation. "Keep pushing," Calliope ordered, her voice firm and unyielding. "We've got them on the run." The battle reached a fever pitch, chaos and fury swirling around them. The Codex pulsed with energy, a silent witness to their defiance, a reminder of the power of a well-told story. "Think we'll get a sequel?" Jax asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Let's survive the first act," Calliope replied, her gaze locked on the enemy ahead. As the tide began to turn, she caught a glimpse of Xyler's flagship, the symbol of his arrogance and ambition. It loomed on the horizon, a dark shadow against the chaos. "Let's make sure he remembers this day," she said, pointing, "and remind him why we're not to be trifled with." They bore down on the flagship, the Codex's energy guiding their movements. It was a risk, a gamble, but they had nothing left to lose. As the flagship began to falter under their assault, Calliope allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd turned the tide, proving that even in the darkest of hours there was always a sliver of hope, a chance to fight on. The battle wasn't over, but they'd given Xyler something to think about. And for now, that was enough. They'd live to fight another day, and maybe, just maybe, they'd get to write the ending to this story on their own terms. The ship rattled again, defying every law of physics by holding together through yet another explosive assault. It was a surprise to nobody that it was still limping along. This battered tin can had more lives than a three-headed space cat. Calliope leaned against the creaky console, the weight of leadership tugging at her like an overeager puppy. "All right, folks," she said, her voice tinged with a sarcasm meant to mask the existential dread. "Time to see if this Codex can really spin a yarn good enough to stop a war." Grendel snorted, cradling his rifle like it was a dear, albeit dangerous, old friend. "If it could do that, maybe it can finally teach Jax how to parallel park this rust bucket." Jax, unfazed, shot back with a grin. "I can park just fine. It's the ground that keeps moving." Ilarionia, her fingers dancing over her wrist device, chuckled. Maybe it'll teach you not to spill coffee on the console every damn morning. Hey, sacrifices need to be made for the perfect brew, Jax replied, unbothered. Besides, caffeine is the only thing keeping us from mutiny. Calliope held up a hand. Focus, team. We've got one shot at this. Ilarionia, you ready to put the codex through its paces? Ilarionia nodded, her wrist device glowing with eerie certainty. Ready as I'll ever be. Let's just hope the galaxy's in the mood for a bedtime story. There was a collective intake of breath as Ilarionia activated the codex. It hummed to life, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. The symbols flickered, and a cascade of data flooded the ship systems. It was like watching a cosmic PowerPoint presentation, only with fewer bullet points and more existential dread. Here we go, Calliope whispered, as if afraid of jinxing the moment. The Codex's story unfolded, an intricate tapestry of history, hope, and half-truths. It was the kind of tale that transcended cultures and languages, painting a vivid picture of unity that even the most cynical of hearts might find hard to mock. Not that Grendel wasn't trying. Feels like they're laying it on a bit thick, he muttered, squinting at the holoscreen. Where's the part about free beer and universal basic income? Next slide, maybe, Jax quipped, his fingers tapping nervously on the weapon's console. Despite the jokes and jabs, there was a palpable shift in the air. The Codex wasn't just a relic with delusions of grandeur. It was a beacon of something more, a call to arms that didn't involve, well, actual arms. Across the solar system, factions began to take notice. The story spread like a virus, infecting minds with an inconvenient hope. Reports are coming in, Ilarionia said, her eyes wide with disbelief. Factions are standing down, laying down arms. It's actually working. Color me shocked, Grendel said, though a hint of relief crept into his gravelly tone. Maybe people aren't as dumb as they look. Speak for yourself, Jax shot back, earning him a half-hearted glare. Calliope allowed herself a small, grim smile. Looks like we're not as alone in this as we thought. As the Codex's message continued its relentless march across the galaxy, Xyler's forces found themselves in an awkward position. Public support for peace was ballooning, an unstoppable tidal wave threatening to drown their ambitions in a sea of goodwill. Xyler's gonna hate this, Jax said, his grin widening. He probably planned a whole victory speech and everything. His problem, Calliope replied, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Ior's is making sure he doesn't change his mind. There was a pause, the silence stretching out as they all took in the surreal turn of events. It was as if they were watching a bad movie where the hero's plan actually worked, a rare and unsettling development in their line of work. Well, Grendel said, breaking the silence, what do we do now? Wait for a thank you card and a fruit basket. I'm allergic to gratitude, Jax deadpanned. And fruit. Calliope shook her head, a laugh bubbling up despite the tension. Now we keep our eyes open and stay ready. Xyler might be down, but he's not out. And we owe him a proper send-off, Ilarionia added, her fingers flying over her device with purpose. Their ship, battered and bruised, drifted through the wreckage of what could have been their final stand. The battle had shifted, the tide turned by the power of a story older than any of them could fathom. Sure, the galaxy was still a mess, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it was a hopeful mess. Think we'll get a movie deal out of this? Jax asked, his tone as light as the situation was heavy. Only if we survive long enough to sign the contract, Calliope replied, her voice losing some of its edge. The broadcast climaxed, the Codex's final notes resonating through the ship with an almost tangible force. It was a symphony of sound and silence, a reminder of the quiet power of stories in a universe that often seemed devoid of them. Peace and unity, Grendel mused. Guess that means no more target practice, huh? Don't worry, Jax said, patting his shoulder. I'm sure there are plenty of other things for you to shoot at, like the coffee maker. Ilarionia chuckled, her eyes glued to the incoming transmissions. Looks like Xyler's forces are backing off. They're really buying into this peace thing. Calliope released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Let's not break out the champagne just yet. We've still got work to do. The Codex, its task completed, settled into the ship's systems with a satisfied hum. It had done its part, a relic from an ancient past breathing life into a battered present. "So what's next, boss?" Grendel asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and resignation. Calliope looked around at her crew, their faces a patchwork of fatigue and defiance. "We keep fighting, not with guns or bombs, but with stories, with truth." "Truth," Jax echoed, a sardonic lilt to his voice. "That's a dangerous word." "Yeah," Calliope agreed, a fierce light in her eyes. "But it's all we've got." The ship continued its journey, a small speck in the vastness of space, carrying with it a story that could change the galaxy, or at least give it a good kick in the pants. "Think Xyler's gonna send a strongly worded letter?" Jax asked as they settled into a new rhythm of uneasy peace. "If he does," Grendel replied, "hopefully it comes with a return address." Ilarionia smirked, adjusting her wrist device. "I'll make sure we draft a hell of a response." The crew, united in their irreverence and resolve, moved forward, ready to face whatever came next. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, a ragtag band of misfits who dared to defy the odds, armed only with humor, sarcasm, and a damn good story. "Looks like we're trending," Ilarionia announced, glancing at the holoscreen. Jax pumped a fist. "Finally, I've been waiting for my viral moment." Calliope shook her head, a wry smile on her lips. "Just remember, fame's a fickle thing, especially when your face is plastered across the galaxy as a rebel leader." Grendel chuckled. "Could be worse. Could be plastered as a wanted criminal." "Why not both?" Jax countered, his grin infectious. The ship pressed on, carrying them toward the next chapter of their uncertain journey. The galaxy was still a dump, Varenthia was still a wasteland, but maybe, just maybe, they'd made a difference. At least enough to afford a round of drinks if they ever made it to a halfway decent bar. "Think we'll get a fan club?" Grendel asked, his tone casual. "Only if they offer discounts," Calliope replied, her eyes on the horizon, ever watchful. And so they continued, a motley crew on a ship that shouldn't have been able to fly, in a universe that shouldn't have given them a second chance. But it had, and for now, that was more than enough. "To the next adventure," Jax toasted, raising an imaginary glass. Calliope nodded, a flicker of determination in her eyes. "To stories worth telling." As they drifted into the unknown, the Codex's tale continued to echo across the stars, a reminder that sometimes the pen really was mightier than the plasma rifle. Calliope leaned against the console, staring at the chaos that was Varenthia's wasteland, now more of a fixer-upper than a death trap. A new era of cooperation was supposedly dawning, but all she saw was a bunch of confused people wandering around like they'd misplaced a universal translator. "Imagine that," she said, smirking. "Turns out the power of stories is more than just a fairy tale." Grendel, who was cleaning his rifle with the kind of love usually reserved for cherished pets, snorted. "Who knew bedtime stories could beat plasma bombs? Maybe we should start a story hour." "Why not?" Jax chimed in, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated stretch. "I've always wanted to be a galactic librarian. Quiet, please, or I'll take you out back with a plasma rifle." Ilarionia tapped away at her wrist device, monitoring the Codex's lingering effects. "You know, I'm starting to think this thing's smarter than all of us combined." "That's not saying much," Grendel quipped, adjusting his rifle's scope as if expecting it to start reading bedtime stories too. The holoscreen flickered, showing images of Varenthia's tentative rebuilding. People were salvaging what they could, and not just in terms of scrap metal. Alliances were being forged, old grievances set aside, at least until someone found a new reason to bicker. "Looks like a renaissance of goodwill," Jax said, rolling his eyes. "Peace and harmony until someone runs out of coffee." Calliope chuckled, the sound incongruously light against the backdrop of smoldering ruins. "As long as caffeine flows, peace is assured." Ilarionia raised an eyebrow. Think Xyler's licking his wounds somewhere, plotting his grand return. If he is, he's gonna need a bigger speechwriter, Grendel said, casting a critical eye at the holoscreen. His old material's a bit stale. The ship, still a marvel of duct tape and hope, drifted lazily above the half-hearted rebuilding efforts below. It was a strange sight, really. People working together, sharing resources, and not trying to kill each other. Well, not actively anyway. So what happens now? Jax asked, swiveling his chair around to face Calliope. We just sit back and let the universe sort itself out. Calliope shrugged, her gaze a mix of curiosity and resignation. We keep an eye on the situation. Make sure no one's pulling a fast one while everyone's distracted by the shiny new piece. And if they do, Grendel asked, sounding almost hopeful, then we remind them why stories are mightier than plasma rifles, Ilarionia said, her tone half serious, half sarcastic. Or why messing with us is a bad idea, Jax added with a grin, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. The crew fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared danger and the rare, brief cessation of hostilities. It was an interlude, a pause in the never-ending chaos that was their lives. Somewhere in that uneasy peace, Calliope found herself reflecting on the Codex and its unexpected impact. It had reshaped the solar system's narrative, rewritten the script of conflict. The power of stories, she'd always thought, lay in their ability to distract, but now she understood they could do more than that. They could inspire, unify, and even save. Funny, she mused, voice barely more than a whisper. We saved the world with a book. Who'd have thought? Not me, Grendel said, his typical cynicism softened by a hint of genuine wonder. Jax laughed, the sound infectious. We should add that to our resumes. Galactic saviors, specializing in storytelling and minor acts of heroism. Ilarionia smiled, her eyes still fixed on the data streaming across her wrist device. The Codex may be ancient, but it clearly knows how to make an entrance. And an exit, Grendel added, reassembling his rifle with mechanical precision. Xyler didn't see this plot twist coming. Calliope's gaze drifted back to the holoscreen, the image of Varenthia's rebuilding efforts a stark reminder of what was at stake. They'd managed to avert a war, but there were no guarantees for the future. So, she said, pulling herself from her thoughts, what do we do with this unexpected peace and quiet? We could start a book club, Jax suggested, his grin as wide as the galaxy. Grendel shook his head, feigning exasperation. I draw the line at discussing literature. Calliope allowed herself a rare moment of genuine laughter. Considering the chaos we've just avoided, I think we can afford a little downtime. Downtime, Ilarionia echoed, her fingers finally stilling over her device. I might need to look that up. It's been a while. As the crew settled into the rare luxury of calm, the ship hummed around them, a reminder of the improbable that had become their reality. They were still a ragtag bunch, flawed and irreverent, but they had managed to make a difference. And in a universe where chaos reigned supreme, that was saying something. Think we'll ever get used to this? Jax asked, gesturing vaguely at the holoscreen. Used to what? Calliope asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. Saving the universe with stories. Being the good guys, Jax replied, his tone caught somewhere between sarcasm and genuine inquiry. Calliope considered this, her mind a whirl of sarcastic retorts and fleeting sincerity. Maybe, but let's not get too comfortable. The universe has a way of shaking things up. That's the understatement of the year, Grendel remarked, his mood light despite the dire backdrop. Ilarionia nodded, a thoughtful look crossing her features. If nothing else, we've proven one thing. And what's that? Jax asked, leaning forward as if expecting some grand revelation. Never underestimate the power of caffeine and a good story, Ilarionia stated with a smirk. As the ship floated above the slowly rebuilding Varenthia, the crew found themselves caught in the strange liminal space between peace and action, waiting for the next shoe to drop in a universe where shoes had a tendency to fall often and without warning. So, boss, Grendel said, leaning back with a sense of casual readiness. What's the plan? Wait for another disaster, or do we go looking for trouble? Calliope shrugged, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Why not both? We're versatile like that, Jax chuckled. Versatile, I like that. Almost makes us sound competent. Competence is overrated, Ilarionia said, her tone as dry as Varinthia's former wasteland. We've gotten by just fine on luck and sarcasm. And it's served us well so far, Calliope agreed, looking at each of her crew in turn. Here's to more improbable victories. The ship continued its orbit, a silent observer of the changes below. Varenthia was far from perfect, but it was better. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The Codex had done its part, and now it was up to the people to write the rest of the story. Think we'll ever get the hang of this peace thing? Jax asked as they prepared to enter the next chapter of their journey. Not likely, Calliope replied with a wry smile. But we're nothing if not adaptable, and so they drifted onward, a band of misfits in a universe that seemed hell-bent on chaos. But for now, in this moment of unexpected calm, they were content. The Codex's tale had woven them a reprieve, and they intended to make the most of it. So, Grendel said, breaking the brief silence. To the next story, Calliope nodded, her expression a mix of determination and irreverence. To the next story. Together they moved forward, ready for whatever the galaxy had in store. They might not have all the answers, but they had each other, and that was a story worth telling.